Alright, time for the second video today. Since the last time we did this, I was reading the amendments, figured it's only appropriate to read the Constitution, specifically its articles. A lot of people reference them, and it's important to know what powers the government actually has and that it doesn't. I am aware that in civics class and U.S. government, we were supposed to go over these as well, and I'm sure many people did, but it's good for a refresher, and for those who haven't taken such classes, it's good to just read it. So, let's start off with the opening statement. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and attach this Constitution for the United States of America. It was called the preamble. I forgot for a bit. Well, brain farts happen. Anyways, on to the next. Article 1 has to do with the legislative branch. It is supposed to be the most powerful branch, and for a while it was, actually. For a brief bit of history, for most of the U.S.'s history, the presidency was not an entity with a lot of power. Now, during wartime, this changed. We see this in the Civil War with Lincoln, and along with other wars, for example, the Spanish-American War, where McKinley directed a lot of the policy there. But it wasn't really until the Progressive Era with Theodore Roosevelt, and then later Woodrow Wilson, with FDR really securing a lot of power for the president through executive orders, that we get this strong imperial presidency, one might call it. Because while Teddy paved the way, even he was heavily hamstrung by the legislature, because he couldn't just executive order everything through, due to not only built-in traditions, but also just how interpretations of the Constitution were at the time. It was FDR and his New Deal that really paved the way for modern policies. In fact, FDR is the one with the single most amount of executive orders ever made. Even Trump, with all the executive orders we hear by now, it's got nothing on FDR, even during his first term. So, let's see what the article says, shall we? All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of the Senate and House of Representatives. For those who don't know, upper house, lower house, indicating a number of things. Most notably, the upper house is generally the senior house, with the lower house often being considered more attached to the people because they have a high turnover rate for elections, which we'll see later, and they have a lower entry requirement, so as a result it's seen as the lower house, basically the house of the people. Also, we got into this with the amendments, but the Senate used to actually be chosen by state legislatures, so that's another reason that the House is considered closer to the people. Right. Section 2. The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states, and the electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. No person shall be a representative who shall not have attained the age of 25 years, and have been 7 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state in which he shall be chosen. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states in which they may be included in this union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to a whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, indentured servitude, and excluding citizens not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of Congress, United States, and within every subsequent term of 10 years, in such manner as they shall by law direct. The number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least 1 representative, and until such enumeration shall be made, the state of New Hampshire shall be entitled to choose 3, Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations 1, Connecticut 5, New York 6, New Jersey 4, Pennsylvania 8, Delaware 1, and Maryland 6, Virginia 10, North Carolina 5, South Carolina 5, and Georgia 3. When vacancies happen in the House of Representatives from any state, the executive authority thereof shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies. The House of Representatives shall choose their Speaker and other officers, shall have the sole power of impeachment. So this is explaining, one, how the House of Representatives works, including its election, but also, if you flip back over, it mentions taxing people. Now, obviously, the 3/5 compromise was a rather infamous decision which allowed slaves to count as 3/5 of a person, but the interesting thing is the direct taxes shall be apportioned on the several states, and part of this is poll taxes. A poll tax was often collected on working people, and so although Indians were excluded since they weren't considered part of the U.S. at this time, regular people would often have to pay poll taxes to local legislatures and the federal government itself. As a result, that's why being taxed is important along with indentured servitude, since an indentured servant was too busy being paid off through labor rather than actually paying a poll tax. Alright, back to Section 3. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, chosen by the legislature thereof, for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. Immediately after, they shall be assembled in consequence of the first election. They shall be divided as equally as may be into 3 classes. The seats of the senators of the first class shall be vacated at the expiration of the second year, of the second class at the expiration of the 4th year, and the third class at the expiration of the 6th, so that 1/3 may be chosen every second year, and if vacancies happen, by resignation or otherwise, during the recess of the legislature of any state, the executive thereof may make temporary appointments, until the next meeting of the legislature, which shall then fill such vacancies. No person shall be a senator who shall not have attained the age of 30 years, been under citizenship of the United States for 9 years, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of the state for which he shall be chosen. The Vice President of the United States shall be President of the Senate, but shall have no vote unless they be equally divided. The Senate shall choose their officers, and also a President pro tempore, in the absence of the Vice President, or when he shall exercise the office of President of the United States. The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments, and when sitting for that purpose, they shall be on oath or affirmation. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold or enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States federal government. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. So, this is obviously talking about the Senate, including a number of things. For example, if we go over to here, you see the classes, and you have the second year bit, but the big thing is the appointments. If, for example, let's say Don Young was, I believe, a senator for several years, but let's say he, for some reason, resigned during the time he was in office. What would happen is, if we were following these rules, he would be appointed. Now, because we have elections for senators, they usually call snap elections to vote him in. I may be misremembering because I don't know how often we have to deal with senators, probably quite a bit given cabinets, but that is the basic one. Also, for both the Senate and the House, they do include the inhabitant of the state for which you shall reside. Basically meaning you gotta live in the state where you're running. You can't, for example, live in California and get elected to the Alaska Senate, which is why a lot of smear campaigns often go to, this person isn't actually from this state, they're somewhere else. Also just because people don't like feeling like they're ruled by someone else. Just as the South during Reconstruction. Boy, that did not end well for anyone. It also talks about impeachment, and it's worth noting. Impeachment basically just allows for you to be removed from office. It does not force you directly to be tried for any crime. So if you're president, you basically have immunity from law enforcement until the impeachment. So if you've committed a crime, you got to get impeached first, and then they can pull the gavel on you. Section 4. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. The Congress shall assemble at least once every year, and such meeting shall be on the first Monday in December, unless they shall by law appoint a different day. So this is just basic meetings, but also it is up to the states to decide how people are elected. So, for example, it is up to Massachusetts to determine the laws for their elections, but Congress can put a general rule about you've got to do this, you've got to do that, and the states are allowed to work within the framework, not outside of it. You may also notice as we're reading, the capitalization is kind of all over the place, and choose is spelled very differently. Well, not very, they just use a U instead. That is a quirk of writing in the 1780s. They had different ways of writing than we do now. Still the same language, just different. Section 5. Each house shall be the judge of the elections, returns and qualifications of its own members, and a majority of each shall constitute a quorum to do business. But a smaller number may adjourn from day to day, may be authorized to compel the attendance of absent members, in such a manner, and under such penalties as each house may provide. Each house may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish its members for disorderly behaviors, and, with the concurrence of 2/3, expel a member. Each house shall keep a journal of its proceedings, and from time to time must publish the same, excepting such parts as may in their judgment require secrecy, and the yeas and nays of the members of either house on any question shall, at the desire of 1/5 of those present, be entered on the journal. Neither house, during the session of Congress, shall, without the consent of the other, adjourn for more than 3 days, nor to any other place than that in which the two houses be sitting. So they can't, for more than 3 days, adjourn, but also they have rules and proceedings for the lower and the upper houses, each being different, one being more structured, that's mainly the House of Representatives, and the Senate is a bit more loose, generally speaking. And if someone, say, breaks their rules, like I believe there was a recent Republican congressman who was finally punished for doing so, then they can be kicked out. Though it is worth noting, because it's effectively kicking out a political asset for both parties, it's less of you did something wrong and more you did something wrong and we have the political backing of our party to get you out because you're on the opposition. Either that or it's getting rid of a patsy. Regardless, these have been abused for the purposes of just political infighting, as is usual. Also, a quorum is effectively the amount of people required to actually pass a law, so you can't just have one congressman in the House of Representatives and say, yes, this is the full house and we can rule on things. No, you gotta have a quorum. So you need a majority to actually decide something. So you can have 51 senators in the room, and they can decide 26 to 25, but you can't have one senator just vote yes. Section 6. The senators and representatives shall receive a compensation for their services to be ascertained by law and paid out of the Treasury of the United States. They shall, in all cases, except treason, felony, and breach of the peace, be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses, and in going to and returning from the same, and for any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place. No senator or representative shall, during the time for which he was elected, be appointed to any civil office under the authority of the United States, which shall have been created, or the annulments whereof shall have been increased during such time, and no person holding any office under the United States shall be a member of either house during his continuance in office. So, you can't serve in another office. You can't be senator for New Hampshire and also the House member of New Hampshire. You're not allowed to. Gotta pick one. More than that, they will be compensated for their time. And I believe there's a term for this immunity in Latin. It's like, I can't remember right now, but it was a very important aspect of Roman republicanism as well, where essentially you are considered almost sacred for the Romans and protected in our system, where while you're in office, you cannot be punished for crimes until you are removed. It is why the way they deal with problematic people is kicking them out, because they are no longer protected by this effectively sacred agreement that you have immunity. If you want to look into the Roman version of it, look into the Gracchi brothers, because they had a whole deal with that. 7. All bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments as on other bills. Every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it become a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approves, he shall sign it. But if he shall not, return it with his objections to that House in which it shall have originated, who shall enter the objections at large on their journal and proceed to reconsider it. If after such reconsideration 2/3 of that House shall agree to pass the bill, it shall be sent, together with the objections, to the other House, by which it shall likewise be reconsidered, and if approved by 2/3 of the House, it shall become a law. But in all such cases, the votes of both houses shall be determined by yeas and nays, and the names of the persons voting for and against the bill shall be entered on the journal of each house respectively. If any bill shall not be returned by the President within 10 days, Sundays excepted, after it shall have been presented to him, the same shall be law, in like manner as if he had signed it, unless the Congress by their adjournment prevent its return, in which case it shall not be law. Every order, resolution, or vote to which the concurrence of the Senate and the House of Representatives may be necessary, except on a question of adjournment, shall be presented to the President of the United States, and before the same shall take effect, shall be approved by him, or, being disapproved by him, shall be repassed by 2/3 of the Senate and the House of Representatives, according to the rules and limitations prescribed in the case of the bill. Now, one thing it's worth noting is, in practice, this is not true. It's called a pocket veto. If the president just sticks it in his pocket and refuses to sign it, it's effectively a veto and it's treated as such. But as for the matter of revenue raising, what this means is, if someone wishes to propose a tax increase or a tax decrease, it must start with the House of Representatives. Usually it's derived by a budget committee of some kind and it's presented to the House. They say, alright, here's what we want to do. It is voted on. Eventually a version of it is passed. It goes to the Senate. They make their own suggestions. They vote on it, and eventually, hopefully, if they actually want to get things done, they make a consistent bill between the two, vote majority yes, and then send it to the president, who can then say yes, no, or some other thing. Usually it's just adding suggestions, but beyond that, not much. It also says we must know the names of those who vote yea and nay. So, if you wanted to, you could absolutely look at a law currently being passed and see, alright, who voted yes or no? Which means, if your senator or House member didn't vote the way you like to, you could entirely decide, based on just that information, to not elect them. The option is there. Section 8. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts, and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imports, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States, to borrow money on the credit of the United States, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States, to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures, to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting and securities and current coin of the United States, to establish post offices and post roads, to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right of their respective writings and discoveries, constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the laws of nations, to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and water, to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years, to provide and maintain a navy, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections and repel invasions, to provide for organizing, arming, disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress, to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district, not exceeding 10 miles square, as may, by cession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of the government of the United States, and exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings, and to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all the powers invested by the Constitution in the government of the United States or in any other department or office thereof. Okay, so this right here, this clause, is known as the necessary and proper clause. It basically allows Congress to, if necessary, pass a law that they deem to be necessary and proper for the execution of the Constitution, but also the interests of the United States. So, despite there being nothing in this about healthcare, as in an actual healthcare policy, if it is considered necessary and proper to establish a state healthcare service, or a fully privatized one, then Congress is fully allowed to pass a law that says, alright, here's what we're going to do about this. Simultaneously, it also is allowed to seize land for the purpose of military installations along with storage. And, if you recognize this, that's D.C. It actually took parts of Maryland and Virginia, but the Virginia part was given back eventually. So, modern D.C. was right here. As for the militia, those are generally under civilian control, but for the purpose of state interests, the states and the federal government were allowed to call up the militia, usually who was funded by the states, as sort of a way to say, hey, you guys who are arming yourselves with that, do you mind helping us out? This basically transitioned into conscription later on, as the needs of the militia were not nearly satisfying enough to basically fund the manpower needs of the modern army. So we went to conscription instead, and it's where selective service came from. It's also worth noting, if you go here, for tribunals, it means all the lower courts, so the federal circuits, state circuits, the appeals, all that, that's under the Congress. That is not under the Supreme Court. You would think a branch named the Judiciary Branch would handle all the judges, but they do not. Just the Supreme Court and enforcement of the law, in particular relating to the Constitution. All those federal courts you hear about, they are entirely under Congress, in the sense that they were appointed by Congress. So yeah. Also, for those who don't know what a letter of marque is, basically it's a legal way of doing piracy. The government will give you a letter that says, hey, you're a state-sponsored pirate, known as a privateer, and you'd go on and steal a bunch of things, usually from other people, like the French. Maybe it's not that bad. Also, piracy and felonies would be things like, for example, just someone stealing a ship, but also, if you kill someone on the high seas, that'd be a felony, and you would be allowed to be punished. Also, trademarks, post offices, and this is counterfeiting, so you can recognize that, standard weights and measures. We actually almost had the metric system set up, but the issue is the weights that we were going to use to base it off of didn't show up, so we stuck with the old imperial system that Britain gave us and how we modified for our needs. Also, if you go up here, you'll notice everything is supposed to be standardized. What that means is if you set an import tax of, let's say, 10% on all goods coming into the country, that is consistent across the board. It does not matter if they show up in New York, New Orleans, some random town in Seattle. Not Seattle, Washington. There you go. That's an actual state. It's all 10%. However, with that being said, for the naturalization process, this did get a bit murky in the 1900s because we passed a law that said only this many immigrants were allowed to come in the country. So we said, all right, we're only allowing this many people for this amount of time based on this census. Fun fact, it had quotas based on location, so more European immigrants were allowed than places like Latin America, Asia, and the like. So, kind of didn't follow in the 1920s. That law was eventually not overturned, but basically rendered innate because we passed new immigration laws, but still happened. It was during the Roaring '20s. Section 9. The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation, not exceeding $10 for each person. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless, when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. No bill of attainder or ex post facto law shall be passed. No capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census or enumeration herein for dictated to be taken. No tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state. No preference shall be given by any regulation of commerce or revenue to the ports of one state over those of another, nor shall vessels be bound to or from one state be obliged to enter, clear, or pay duties in another. No money shall be drawn from the treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law, and a regular statement of and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. No title of nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of the Congress, except of any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. Apologies for my confusion, I was having issues reading there. But for the last bit, it essentially means you're not allowed to receive a title of nobility, especially if you're in office and dealing with a foreign government. For example, a lot of countries at the time would give out titles of nobility for those who were loyal to them. The Congress, through the Constitution, forbid this. So if I was president, I couldn't say, "You there, you're really helpful dealing with this problem for me. You're going to become the Duke of Kentucky." And I can't just give them like some land in Kentucky and say, "All right, you're Duke there now." I'm not allowed to do that, and neither can the Queen of Britain, well, not King, say, "All right, you are now the Duke of Cornwall." Can't do that. Simultaneously, with this right here, it says, no money shall be drawn from the treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law, and a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures. Basically, it means Congress has the power of the purse, they control the money, and you can't just say, "All right, I'm going to take this money out and spend it here." That being said, it says shall be drawn, not shall be spent. So it is entirely possible that one could argue through this, there's a loophole where you can draw out as much money from the treasury by law, but you don't have to spend it. However, they do have to disclose where that money is going. Simultaneously, these also establish rules involving trade, which says if you are inside the states, you cannot tax each other. New York cannot tax goods coming from Pennsylvania or New Jersey. Ohio can't tax anything coming from Illinois. Trade through the United States is free. No taxes or duties, and you can't make something that privileges one state over the other. So you can't say North Carolina can have 5% tariffs, while New Orleans let's just say New Orleans because they decided to make it very specific and not Louisiana as a whole, has 20% tariffs. Can't do that. Not even for cities. Furthermore, it has rules about slavery, because that was a big compromise at the time. And so instead of just banning slavery outright, they said, alright, in a few years you're not allowed to buy slaves from overseas, but you can keep all the slaves you still have. It's also worth noting, it does not say it bans the slave trade, just that they can finally start doing something about it then. Which they basically immediately did, because they didn't want to take any risk with that. Not that the South really agreed with it, but that was their problem. They kinda got shot for it later. Also, habeas corpus, they gotta tell you for what you're doing. So they can't just arrest you because they feel like it unless there's something big going on, which has been done before. Lincoln, for example, suspended habeas corpus in an effort to deal with the Civil War. How moral was that? Debatable, but he did. Right, Section 10. No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque in reprisal, coin money, admit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, pass any bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts, or grant any title of nobility. No state shall, without the consent of the Congress, lay any imposts or duties on the imports or exports except what may be absolutely necessary for executing its inspection laws, and the net produce of all duties and imposts laid by any state on exports or imports, for the use of the Treasury of the United States, and all such laws shall be subject to the revision and control of the Congress. No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duties of tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in times of peace, enter into any agreement or compact with another state or the foreign power, or engage in war unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit a delay. So essentially this is saying that sovereignty goes to the United States federal government. The states can't negotiate for their own. They are not independent countries. They are under the United States. They follow the same laws, and they can't levy taxes without express consent of the federal government on imports and exports. Also, I forgot to mention it earlier, but ex post facto laws means it applies after the fact. So if I, for example, pick up a coin from the side of the road, and a law is later made that says that's illegal, I can't be held responsible for something I did before the law was passed. I have to commit it after the offense, because otherwise it allows for a lot of reprisals to involve just passing a law that conveniently includes what your opponent did, and now you can arrest him. Go figure. On to Article 2, the presidency. It's smaller than the Congress one, so this will be a bit quicker. Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years and, together with a Vice President, chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. Each state shall appoint, in such a manner as the legislature thereof may direct, a number of electors, equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled to in Congress, but no senator or representative, or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States, shall be appointed an elector. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for 2 persons, of whom one at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves, and they shall make a list of all the persons voted for, and of the number of votes for each, which list they shall sign and certify and transmit sealed to the seat of the government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate, so the Vice President. The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and the House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. So this is just how the Electoral College works, essentially. The person having the greatest number of votes shall be the President, if such a number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if there be more than one who have such a majority, and all have an equal number of votes, then the House of Representatives shall immediately choose by ballot one of them for President. And if no person have a majority, then from the 5 highest on the list, the said House shall in like manner choose the President. But in choosing the President, the vote shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having 1 vote. A quorum for this purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and a majority of all the states shall be necessary to a choice. In every case, after the choice of the president having the greatest number of votes of electors shall be vice president. But if there should remain 2 or more who have equal votes, the Senate shall choose from them by ballot the vice president. The Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States. No person, except a natural-born citizen or citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of the Constitution, shall be eligible for the office of president, neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained the age of 35 years and have been 14 years a resident within the United States. In case of the removal of the president from office, or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of said office, this same shall devolve on the vice president, and the Congress may by law provide for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability both of the president and the vice president, without declaring what officer shall then act as president, and such officer shall act accordingly until the disability be removed, or a president shall be elected. The president shall, at stated times, receive for his services a compensation which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that any period other than emolument from the United States, or any of them, before he enter on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear, or affirm, that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and will do to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So this is all about choosing the president and how to nominate them. It's worth noting, let's see if I can remember what it was. So, yeah, no. None really significant here. It's just the basics of the Electoral College and how the system works. But overall, it's very straightforward. And we have had several go to the House before. It's where Jackson got his claim that he was cheated out of the presidency at first to John Quincy Adams, because that one went to the House, and Jackson, who had won the majority of the popular vote, if I'm not mistaken at that time, at the very least more than everyone else, considered it a corrupt bargain that he got cheated out of the presidency because of it. He won later, but it's Jackson. Also, the Bible is not mentioned here. It was a thing established with Washington, but it's not in the Constitution. It's just a thing they do. Section 2. The President shall be the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states. When called into the actual service of the United States, he may require the opinion, in writing, of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices. Excuse me there. And he shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. So this is... He shall have power, by and with advice and consent of the Senate, to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur, and he shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States, whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law, but the Congress may, by law, invest an appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper, and the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. The President shall have the power to fill up all vacancies that may happen during the recess of the Senate by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of the next session. So these are recess appointments. During a recess, the President is allowed to appoint to offices people who will last until the Senate can go in and say, all right, here's who we propose instead. So if the ambassador, say, suddenly dies or is incapable of performing his duties, and the Senate is currently busy relaxing or whatever, then the President is allowed to appoint someone until the next session of the Senate. Also, as I was pointing out up here, if you go here, this is where we get presidential pardons from. Oftentimes, it is political in nature for both sides, where everyone is using it as essentially a way to give a pardon to people who they like and not to those who they don't. However, if you were impeached, you're not allowed to be pardoned for that. Now, it is worth noting that the courts have added a stipulation to the pardon bit. You gotta know what you're being pardoned for in order for it to come into effect. Also, they need the opinions and writings relating to the duties of respective offices. So if the president shall establish a new cabinet position, then they need opinions in writing of the principal officer of each department, including the new one. Excuse me. Also, that's how we choose Supreme Court justices. Same way as we choose ambassadors, weirdly enough. Section 3. You shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the state of the Union and recommend to the consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. He may, on extraordinary occasions, convene both houses, or either of them, and in the case of disagreement between them with respect to the time of adjournment, he may adjourn them to such time as he thinks shall be proper. He shall receive ambassadors and other public ministers. He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and shall commission all the officers of the United States. Okay, so that's Section 4. But real quickly, if we look at Section 3, it's mostly just about the State of the Union address, but also the president is technically allowed to reconvene the houses. So if there's a crisis, the president's allowed to say, Congress, enough of whatever recess you're currently going through, get to the Capitol, we need to vote on things, get things done. He's also allowed to dismiss them shortly after for whatever time he seems to believe is justified. However, beyond that, he can't really do much in Congress. Section 4. President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. That's how to remove a president, though it is worth noting, these are not defined. Now, bribery and treason are absolutely defined, but high crimes and misdemeanors could be anything from stealing someone's wallet, which is a misdemeanor to my knowledge, and burning down the White House. Yeah, it's not defined that well. But if we did define it eventually, that could be useful. It's also worth noting that it's all civil officers of the U.S., so it's not just the president. If, for example, the head of the Department of Energy did something really stupid and, say, decided to attack an energy facility, they could use this to impeach him. Article 3, the Judiciary. This is also much shorter, as you can see, and so it's going to be a lot quicker. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judges, both of the Supreme Court and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior, and shall, at stated times, receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during the continuance in office. So, you see consistently that compensation is a big one throughout all the articles. It means you can't use the power of the purse to essentially threaten someone's job. So if someone needs money to survive, which we all do, this is a capitalist system, but if someone needs money, then Congress can't say, alright, courts, yeah, we're going to cut your salaries during office because we don't like what you're doing. But also, just reinforcing, Congress can establish the inferior courts, so that is all on them. It has for good behavior, ill-defined, like a lot of things. What is good behavior? Is it shaking hands with a person? Is it punching them in the face for being annoying? Technically, it could be both. It's not defined. Section 2. The judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States, and treaties made or which shall be made under the authority, to all cases affecting ambassadors, like public ministers, and consuls. Excuse me, I'm a bit tired. To all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, to controversies to which the United States shall be a party, controversies between two or more states, between a state and citizens of another state, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants of different states, and between a state or the citizens thereof and foreign states, citizens, or subjects. In all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, and those in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. In all the cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations that the Congress may make. The trial of all crimes, except in cases of impeachment, shall be by jury, and such trial shall be held by the state, in the state where the said crimes shall have been committed. But when not committed within any state, the trial shall be at such place or places as the Congress may by law have directed. So this has a whole lot in it, but in the case of a lot of this, it's defining what the role of the courts are. So if it's a matter of disagreements on borders between the states, that goes to the courts, so the Supreme Court. And if land claims are disputed, and let's say one state gives land to a bunch of citizens, but it's claimed by another state who says, no, this is our land, we're not giving it to you, then the Supreme Court holds it there. This actually did happen, weirdly enough, with Connecticut and Pennsylvania. Yeah, it was a whole thing. It even resulted in a war. 3 wars, actually. Whole thing. But also, when it comes to treaties and upholding them, the courts are allowed to rule on them. And as for appellate jurisdiction and original jurisdiction means it's held to the courts, so they're the first ones to hear it. Appellate jurisdiction means someone looked at it, said, all right, we've decided this, and then they went to a court of appeal and said, hey, I think you got it wrong here. Could you kindly have someone else hear this? With the Supreme Court being the final ruler. So if the Supreme Court says, for example, your case is wrong, this is a bad ruling, we're throwing it out, then some federal court can't say, well, because I disagree and they appealed to me, I can now rule on it now. The federal court can, however, appeal a state decision. So there's a whole hierarchy of appeals. Also, it basically says that if it's committed in a crime, in a place, you are supposed to be tried in that area. You can't be tried in some other state for a crime you committed in the state you are currently residing in. This was made largely thanks to Britain having a habit of shoving people on a boat and sending them to the islands. Don't know why they would send them there. Seems a bit crowded. But that's how they did. Section 3. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act or on confession in open court. Congress shall have powers to declare the punishment of treason, but no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood or forfeiture except during the life of the person attainted. So this is just about treason and how it's dealt with, because for a lot of people, treason just meant speaking up against the king at the time. Now, depending on the country, this would vary, but it was still a very big thing, so setting the rules about what treason was very important. Now, aid to the enemies is an important one, because if you, for example, harbor a criminal, that could be seen as harboring an enemy of the United States, so aiding and comforting them. Having said that, some might argue that it is not, because that'd be a state thing. I don't really agree with that logic, but meh. Regardless, this is just about treason, what classifies it, and the fact that you cannot make it so that someone is punished for the treason of someone else. It can only be during the life of the person who has committed the crime and towards that person. Article 4 is about the states, if I remember correctly. Section 1. Full faith and credit shall be given in each state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state, and the Congress may, by general laws, prescribe the manner in which such acts, records, and proceedings shall be proved and the effect thereof. So, basically just housekeeping, making sure the records are proper. Section 2. The citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of the citizens of the several states. So if the amendments say that you have the right to free speech, that does not stop at the border of Texas, or California, or Alaska. It goes to all the states and applies to every single citizen. Emphasis on citizens here. The Constitution does not protect non-citizens because they are not under its authority. Okay. The citizens of each state shall be entitled. A person charged in any state with treason, felony, or other crime, who shall flee from justice and be found in another state, shall, on demand of the executive authority of the state from which they fled, be delivered up to be removed to the state having jurisdiction of the crime. No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim to the party to whom such service or labor may be due. So this actually was used a lot for slavery. They would say, it's in the Constitution, you have to return our slaves, which technically is true. However, I don't really care for it, and it's a good thing we banned at least it partly. And then there's also, if you're found in another state, so for example, if I stole from a grocery store in Seattle, Washington, I can't go to Oregon and wait out because they can't try me. What'll happen instead is Oregon's police will catch me, send me back to Washington, and I'll be tried in Seattle. Section 3. New states may be admitted by the Congress into this union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, nor any state be formed by the junction of two or more states or parts of states without the consent of the legislatures of the states concerned as well as of the Congress. The Congress shall have the power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or property belonging to the United States, and nothing in this Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or of any particular state. So, going back to here, because that's the end of Section 3. 1. New states may be added, but they can't conflict with current land claims. So, Ohio can't take parts of Pennsylvania. However, this is important for West Virginia's existence. When it comes to approval from Congress, a new state can technically be formed out of an old one, like what happened with West Virginia. It seceded from regular Virginia during the Civil War. The controversy comes from the fact that the state legislature is supposed to agree to that, but I'm pretty sure they didn't because they were actively revolting against the Union at the time. Then again, we tend not to care what traitors say, so we can safely ignore them. It also is basically reaffirming the property rights and land claims of every state involved. Right. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion and on application of the legislature or of the executive when the legislature is reconvened against domestic violence. So internal rebellion, like Shays' Rebellion, but also revolt and invasion. It also means we can't do what certain other countries do because, for example, if you've heard of the UAE, the name is United Arab Emirates and is made up of several emirates, which are monarchies. The U.S. doesn't allow that. You gotta be a republic of some form. Now, it depends on what type of republic, because you could, for example, have an Alaska model or Virginia, because I believe they have their own version of government. I forgot what it was for a brief second, but it's the same as Pennsylvania's. They got their own system there. Article 5. It's one section. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislature of 2/3 of the several states, shall call in convention for proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode ratification may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses of the ninth section of this first article, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. So this is rules about amendments. It's also worth noting when it comes to applying amendments, there's usually a time limit for it. So, for example, if I wanted to make a new amendment to the Constitution regarding the Electoral College or anything else, if I tried to do so, it can't wait 10 years. I gotta get the 3/4 approval within a time usually laid out in the amendment itself. Article 6. It is also one section. All debts contracted and engagements entered into for the adoption of the Constitution shall be as valid against the United States under this Constitution as under the Confederation. This Constitution and the laws thereof of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding. The senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, and all executive and other judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, but no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office of public trust under the United States. So, the first part is the Supremacy Clause, along with the affirmation that yes, all the debts we took out to pay for the revolution are still valid, they still count, so France, don't get angry. But the Supremacy Clause basically says federal rights go. So if the federal government declares we're going to eat soup for the day, now that'd be an extreme waste of it, but it's a stupid example, then that's what goes. It could be the same with new tax laws. If the government decides to enact a poll tax, it can't anymore, but it used to, then the states aren't allowed to say no. If the federal government rules it, it goes. Furthermore, there can be no religious test for people who want to apply to a public office, so you can't discriminate via religion through that method. On to Article 7, which is how to pass it. The ratification of the Convention of 9 States shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states, so ratifying the same. Done in convention by the unanimous consent of the state's president on the 17th day of September in the year of our Lord 1787, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 12th, in witness whereof we have hereunto subscribed our names. So, the next one is the names of all the people, including George Washington. Interesting way to spell president, but So this describes how to get the Constitution into law. Funnily enough, this actually subverted the amendment process to the Articles of Confederation. Because in the Articles of Confederation, if you wanted to add to an amendment to the Articles, you had to get absolute unanimous approval. In effect, the Constitution was a coup, where they said, alright, the Articles are clearly not working. Jefferson's over in France, dealing it with his own things. So let's all converge, discuss, and decide, what should we do about this government? Because the Articles clearly aren't working as they are now. And so they decided to make a new form of government, and basically subverted all of the Articles to do it. They still accepted the debts and all previous engagements from the Articles, but they essentially annexed every state, which was previously under an alliance of friendship, into one country, united. And I'm not complaining, because that was a better decision. But yeah, real quick, those are all the people who signed. You may recognize a few, particularly right here, and if you know your history, also him. It's a Pinckney. But yeah, you may notice something. If we go to Virginia, there is no Jefferson. He was not a part of this. The writer of the Declaration of Independence was not a part of this. They skipped him. And that is our Constitution. What do you think? I quite like it.